been a while since I've done something like this, so you'll have to bear with me a little bit. I've been carving for 30 years now, pretty much. Used to come here, not quite as young as the kids that were here, but I started at a fairly younger age, especially back in when I started carving. Most everybody was way older. There was a huge generation gap in there. Now people are starting to kind of get back into working with their hands, and I see a little more diverse age group, and I'm really glad to see the super young kids starting this. I do taxidermy full time. That's back in 7th grade. I took a free class, and you could do whatever you wanted. You could do string art, you could carve. I got the teacher cut out a bunch of different things. You could do a dog howling at the moon, kind of a character-y type thing. I did a beluga whale, and then I did a killer whale. And what we did was a piece of balsa wood, and then we got an X-Acto blade. We got the kit with the big handle and a bunch of blades. And, it was like $10, $15 for that. We could do whatever we want. I did both of those, painted them, put them on a stick, and whatever. I don't know whatever happened to those, but they're gone. And then I never carved again. And then it was probably 10 years later when I started into the taxidermy. One of the guys at the shop, he was competing with fish carving, because it kind of came hand in hand. We did mounted fish, and then the fish carving, we had all this great reference, and we could see airbrushes, we could paint, and I started doing it, and started competing. Found this club. There was another club that was in the area too, and it was the Vikings Carving Club, and those guys, they carved everything. I don't know if they're still around or not, but olive pits. They would carve faces onto olive pits, peach pits. One of the guys is Ivan from down in Faribault. He's got I think he has a carving class in a shop there where he sells carving supplies. He does crucifixes for churches. So I mean, it was such a diverse group of guys that did that, and I learned a whole lot of different techniques. And since I've been doing this for 30 years, I've seen lots of guys, kind of come and go in the bad way. But there used to be the talent that used to be at this carving club, because there wasn't all the tools, there wasn't all the supplies you could just go and readily buy now. You had to make a ton of stuff. There was a guy that some of you might know, his name was Dick Peters, and this guy had the original what do you call it, cluster house, whatever. You walk in, and there was an aisle, and it was boxes of sandpaper and everything. I don't know how his wife put up with it, but I mean, it was unbelievable. But that guy, you say, Dick, I need this, and boom, he would show you how to make it. Glass eyes. He made glass eyes for all his ducks, all his birds, and everything out of beer bottles, and he would melt them down, and he had a special little thing, and he heat it up, and it would melt it, let it cool, and bam, there he had an eye. He knew he showed me all these different techniques for welding those, branches and things. Because what I do, I need a ton of different, ways to attach my fish. Lily pads, like that. The little post to stick the fish on, like so. It's just not a decoy sitting there, and the hardest thing you need to do is put a keel. And if you're really into competing, they make the fancy stands, and that's about as far as you go as opposed to that. So I sought out all different avenues way back when. The thing in fish carving, it was such an infancy. I was part of, at one of the world competitions, talking about what the rules were going to be and different things like that. And in competitive fish carving and in a lot of the other carving, everything has to be made. So you're not allowed to cheat like this, where this is a real piece of driftwood. You had to carve the driftwood. So this is kind of an example of how I started out, the kind of the progression, and then you paint it. Same thing with all the rocks. All the rocks had to be made. If it was going to be sand, you just couldn't put Elmer's glue and sprinkle some sand on there. You had to texture a piece of wood to make it look like sand and then try to paint it. So the techniques and everything, it seems to be getting kind of lost, because I don't see anybody doing any of that kind of stuff except the songbird carvers. That is still around. Something as simple as a rope. You can't use a real rope and just stick it in some, fiberglass and let it harden. No, you had to carve your rope. Chain. This is part of a chain, and I figured out that I was screwing up, so it's kind of my, oops, I just stopped in my example chain, because all the links are going to touch each other rather than go around each other. But something as simple as that. I mean, everything has to be made. Piece of driftwood, stump, that's all carved and then wood burned and painted. So that's where I came from. The coral, you can't use real coral, so all your coral has to be made. With Dick Peters, he showed me a bunch of different techniques for hidden hangers. So this is a piece of metal sandwiched between two pieces of wood, and I pre-soldered with silver jeweler solder, which is a lot harder than your regular plumber solder. Regular plumber solder I've used, and it's failed. So you actually have to go to a jeweler or through a jeweler supply, and you get this silver solder. It takes a different flux, but when it's on, when you weld, solder, it's on there. So instead of using Bondo or some kind of epoxy, that's what I did, was I sandwiched that armature in between there, and then that goes in the fish. And now at a hobby store, they make all sorts of different rods and stuff. This is an octagon rod, and it's the male end. And then I inserted in here a piece of female end, and it telescopes. So I can put this on here, I think. I can put that on there like that, or I can turn it a little bit, and boom, it just stays, because it's octagon, it won't spin. So, you just had to learn all sorts of different things like that. And here's an example of what that looked like. Well, you can see, this is before I sandwich the piece of wood on. So, this is a piece that I intend to get done some year, but where is he? He said that it was working on it for 2 years, the decoy. This is 25? I think that I've planned to get this done, but it'll never get done probably. And one of the reasons being too is way back then, all the carvers used either basswood or tupelo, and there was another wood called Jelutong, was also a good carving wood, but this tupelo was the greatest thing since sliced bread. There's no grain, super light, takes detail really well. Maybe not necessarily good for hunting decoys because it is a little soft, and if you threw them all in a bag it would all dent up, but for realistic detailed carvings it works great. So that's how I started out. This is a thing I made up just so I didn't have to go through all the steps all the time. Start out a block of wood, bandsaw it out, kind of start getting it roughed in, a little more detailed, till I start wood burning, and then the next step is painting, and that's where you come up with something like that. The eyes, I use regular taxidermy glass eyes for that. I started getting away from that a few years back and started carving the eyes in and trying to kind of keep it all, wood and not integrate something different in there. The last carving I just did, I went back to the glass eye because there's something about that glass eye you can't carve. It's one of those things that's hard to capture. And so that's where I'm at with that kind of stuff now. Now that Tupelo, the Jelly tongue, all that kind of stuff, that was my thing. Marv Meyer, I don't know how many people here have ever met Marv Meyer, but he carves a lot out of walnut, butternut, natural woods. He stains all his walnut pieces. He collects the walnuts, and then the outer shell, when it gets old and whatever, it gets dark. Well, he smashes that up, puts it in water, and that's on his Canadian geese. That's what the head is. He stains it with the actual walnut shell stain, at one point, I started getting away from this type of carving, the 3D realistic carving, and I started getting into these morph carvings, where it's a piece of wood and then it comes up into a fish. And Dave and Mary Arndt, another old-time name, some of you might know it, some might not. They're from Iowa. It was a husband and wife team, and they used to, being in Iowa, they had access to tons of walnut, and they would do these huge carvings out of walnut trees practically. And this one they did, it kind of came and it swooped around, and it was two Alaskan terns. So you got these little birds on this Volkswagen-sized piece of walnut that they carved and made all wavy and everything. And I was like, wow, that's neat. So I started doing that to fish, but I would take the walnut and I would carve that little swoosh like they did, and then what they did was they took and glued the Tupelo on there. And I started doing that. I would take this fish, let's see here. This was the last one, okay? See how this is cut and then there's a hole in here? Okay, I would take and I would drill a hole in the little swoosh or whatever I did, and then I would glue this on and screw it on to the piece of wood. Well, Marv's like, what are you doing that for? And I said, well, because that's how you do it. No, that's not how you do it. Just use one piece of wood. And I said, well, what do you mean? He says, well, the butternut, it carves just as easy as that Tupelo stuff. And when he said stuff, it was a little harsher. And he goes, I said, well, what do I want to do that for? He's like, well, now you have a seam. So now you have this walnut, and then you have this Tupelo, and you just glued it together. It can crack over the years, it could break, whatever. He goes, if you just use one piece, you don't have to worry about that. And I'm like, oh, okay. So with that morph style, that's what I started doing. And then I learned how easy butternut was to work on. And that's where I started just carving my fish right out of the butternut, paint them, the whole works. So I started doing that. It's a lot cheaper. You can find it everywhere. It's strong. Even though it's dense and heavy, it still takes a lot of detail. I don't know if anyone's ever used butternut, but if you haven't, you can find a piece. I would recommend trying it, even for the decoys or whatever. It's really nice wood. the grain difference really isn't that much unless you get a super knot, then that gets a little hard. So you just try to get the clearest pieces you can. The other thing is, since I do taxidermy, guys from Montana come out with all that nice aromatic cedar, the western cedar. It is also a very awesome wood to carve on. So this is a grayling. It's kind of a western fish, kind of a Alaskan fish. I thought, can't use butternut on there. There's no butternut trees where these guys are, so the cedar works great for that. So I started carving out of the natural wood, and I used to do all my fish 3D, 100% all the way around. And then guys, people would look at it and they go, "Oh, is that a reproduction? Did you cast that?" And I go, "No, it's made out of wood." "It's made out of wood?" And I was like, "Yeah." Well, I had no way to prove it because I painted the whole thing and I textured the whole thing. So nowadays, this is what I do. I leave the whole back wood and I paint the front. So now if this is sitting on here, you can't tell that the back side isn't done until you turn it around. But how neat when you go, "It's wood," and they go, "It's wood," and you go, "Yeah," and you turn it around and then they see all the grain and they're like, "Oh, yeah, that's wood." So that's kind of my new style. I don't have a completely done piece because it just got sold last weekend, so I don't have one. But when I see this wood, I look at it and you try to imagine, what grain you're going to want on the back. Now these are very blasé pieces of wood, but the best example I had was, if I look at this, that's the part I'm going to carve on, because I'm going to leave this just like this. I'm going to smooth this off and gloss coat that, but I'm going to leave that bark in there, and I think that's going to add kind of a real neat thing to the back. So when I say you want to, there's a right side and a wrong side, it's not necessarily the way it's curving or whatever. It's the grain pattern you see once you get in there and you cut. Like this, it's got a really cool pattern. That might be the side you want to put on the back. But then you cut it and you go, "Oh, there it is over here." So, but this is less. So this fish, I would probably use this as the back side just because it's in the center more. So that's one thing I want to look at when I do that, is which way the grain goes. Same thing with the butternut. I was kidding with Tom earlier, who's kind of showing him that. Here's a nice knot. Here's some neat grain pattern. Then you turn it over, and it's kind of the same on this side. It's got the knot right here. But still, I look at this and I see a lot more. So this would probably be my back for this carving. Thing that's really good to have is reference. Way back in the day, caught this sunfish. I put plaster over it, did a very crude plaster cast. Then once the cast was done, I pulled the plaster off once it was set. And then this is just plain automotive Bondo mixed with a little bit of automotive fiberglass just to make it runny. Poured it around. Once that hardened, boom. Now I have a cheap way of doing it. I tried to figure out a way for guys to cast ducks like that for study, but you really can't. That's why fish are kind of nice that way, because there's a lot of reference, 3D reference you can do with the duck carving. And also fish too. If you go and have someone taxidermy your fish, you're subject to how he carves the body and how he puts it together, whether it's distorted or not. Same thing with ducks. If you're gonna get a duck done from a taxidermist for a study purposes, you really have to go and check out your taxidermist and find one that anatomy is really close on. Sometimes you're gonna have to pay a little bit more for that, but I mean, it makes all the difference, because there's bad taxidermy and good taxidermy. And when judged a carving competition once. I think it was the last time I judged. The guy came up to me and goes, "What's wrong with my piece? I carved it exactly like my thing, like my reference." And I said, "Well, was it a taxidermy reference?" And he said, "Yeah." I said, "Well, you carved a very bad piece of taxidermy." I mean, it was exact, and there's not much more I could say. I didn't know what to say because he kind of came at me in such a way, and he was right. He did carve it exactly, probably like the mount was, but it was a bad mount, which turns out to be, a bad carving in the long run. So, live fish, real pictures, reference. I'd say use that whenever you can. Pictures of ducks. Try not to use taxidermy when you're carving your decoys, unless you know that it's spot on, or really, really close to spot on. So that's kind of the summary of everything. Then I was going to show some kind of techniques that I use to get certain things here. I don't know if you would want to come in closer. Here's another thing too. I don't know what you guys have for carving setups, but this is a super cheap dust collector. I know they can get pretty expensive. Ordering them through catalogs and whatnot. This is a squirrel cage fan. I just went to a plumbing and heating shop, and they always have them lying around, piles of them, because, like I said, they're guys, and the motor's still good, so you don't want to throw it away. Here you go, you ask, and they'll usually give you one, or it'll cost you $10. So that's what's inside here. Regular furnace filter, and you're set to go. I turned this into a table just because it's kind of nice. Wheel around the shop. I've got a smaller shop, so everything I have is on casters and it moves around.
You're on the big screen there, so everybody in the room will be able to see what you're doing.
Oh, okay. Turn this a little bit more then. Okay. So, let's basic, simple. I mean, everybody here is a little bit more than an extreme beginner, right? Or not? There's some people who haven't carved before, or just starting to carve. Just starting to carve. Okay. One of my things is I'm a power carver. So I have to pick woods that are power carving woods. Basswood is not my wood. I carved a fish out of basswood one time. That's all it takes. Because it fuzzes up with the bits I use. You think you got it all smooth, you put the sanding sealer on there, and it looks like a porcupine. You're like, what? Now you got to sand that all off. It's just a lot of work. Power tools, I use very little knives. The closest thing I get to a knife is my wood burner for cleaning up areas. With this dust collector, this is how. Hopefully I don't keep my pants or my shirt. And you can see with a brush filter, I don't even need a mask. Okay, so basically what I do is I end up roughing everything out, with the super coarse carbide bits. I get that all done. Then I switch to my smaller artillery. And I've noticed it's good to have more handles. Then you don't have to change armatures. this one is a really nice one. I don't see this very often anymore, but it's just like it has a drill. You see it's got a chuck key. So you can get various sizes, and sometimes if you order, you got some Japanese ones, they don't fit your collets quite right. You can't never get them tight. And then you can't get them in the little bigger one. It's one of those things. So this is good for all those. Okay. So again, get everything all rubbed in, smooth. You got the spiny dorsals back here. Just as simple as that. Gonna come in here. See, that's just easy breezy. Okay, now I'll switch to this guy. There we go. Little technique. Okay. With these fins, the soft fins, you have to remember they're a bunch of fingers. So when I see guys carve stuff, and I still do it at whatever, some artistic license, they want to go like this. Fish fins don't bend like that. They bend like that. So it gives the illusion that they're bending like that, but they're just all spines that move like that. And how I create that is I've got a roto bit, a round ball. Now I'm going to cut that in half. I'll cut that in half. And I'm going to cut that in half. Catch it in the light the right way. Pass that around. You can see how that goes. I don't have. I'll do it here on this piece with a different bit. Just imagine the tip of this is that round ball. So I'm going to come in here. Okay, this is in between my fin rays. So that's kind of what I'm doing. And the next thing is to cut that in half, cut that in half, cut that in half. Because each one of the fins, when they go out, they break. So they go out and they fork, and then this one forks, and it's usually 3 to 4 times. So if you get anything close to that, you're usually pretty good. Because no one's going to go in there and count how many times it's split. That's kind of the basic. The other thing. Okay, when I have a piece. Oh, by the way, let me go back to this. My pattern making. I make all my own patterns. These are all real fish. Lay them down, trace them out. You got to have a little bit artistic ability when it comes to the face. I make little marks out here, kind of key points wherever this is, and then I draw that in. I've actually taken I don't have it, I forgot to grab it. But I've actually taken fish and put them right on the photocopier. And some of that detail does come in there, and then you just kind of go in and trace it and then, you know, enhance it. But I always try to use a real fish. Don't try to do it in my head. That type of thing.
Making them copies, cook it right on the copy.
Right, yeah, exactly. Yeah. So the other thing too is, here's the same fish. I just wanted a little smaller. Thanks to Xerox, you just push and you can make all sorts of different sizes. And you're okay with doing that because everything stays the same. Fish just keep getting bigger. It doesn't mean that their eye gets different. Everything stays in proportion. So when you just make it bigger, you're good to go. So that's that. Here's the pattern. When I make my patterns too, these fins are always on the fish. Okay, I carve these, as you can see. I always carve these on the fish. The pec fin and the pelvic fin, or the pec fin and the pelvic fin right here. Those are a little more fragile. They're sticking out in the middle, you know, out in the no man's land. You gotta pick the grain, you know, wisely. So you want the grain to go this way and this way. You wouldn't want to go this way because one hit, it snaps. And you see, I put these on the fish. Then I cut them out. This is simple pattern making 101 right here. I cut them out. Now I always have that. I can just go on a piece of wood and trace that out. And I don't have I used to do it where I had these separate, and then I had to paper clip them on there, and they all get stuck together. And after a while, you kind of get smart. The other thing too is when you're doing this, to take kind of samples of what size the scales are. Like right back here, see how small they are? And then they're this size right here, and then up here they're this big, and up here they're this big. Back in the day, trying to figure out how to put scales on a fish, there was no way. There wasn't these automatic fish scalers, okay? And then all the different wood burner guys started coming out with, oh, here's a fish scale, boom, boom, boom. Well, what happens is now it's a machine. They all look the same. They're all the same size, and it's hard to transfer or transition from this small scale into this size scale because they don't have the graduated deal. The only way to do that is by hand with the wood burner. And there again, it's one of those artistic license things. There's small scales, big scales. I'll do it big so we can see. When you do a scale, we're gonna go. Oh, that's a little hot. It's Tupelo. Haven't used Tupelo forever. Okay, so we're gonna make a half moon like so. Okay, now most people when they do scales, now they're gonna come here and they're gonna start here and they're gonna go like this. But that's incorrect. Fish scales don't do that. You go like this, and then it's a third of the way over. Then we're going to put that. Then we're going to put a scale right here, and then you just kind of keep going. And you can see this is something you do in front of the TV. And this is where your wife likes you because you come out of the dungeon and you sit there and you go, oh yeah. She talks at you, and you go back and. Then you go, oh, now I should have blown on that. Because after a while, when you start doing the scales, your wood burner changes temperature a little bit. If you got a really, really good one, it doesn't. Okay, but, so now I need to make the scale a little bit smaller, but I got to keep it going. And I can see how I just changed the size of the scale as we got. Okay, now if I had a tip that was that scale tip, I would have had to stop, let it cool down, change the tip, go to the one side, go to the other side. This does it all. You can see, pass that around.
You just do freehand, you don't draw it first.
Every time I've drawn it, it never comes out the same. Never. So it's one of those things where, you know, it's practice makes perfect. No. Oh, wow, bad word. Paper. Practice makes okay.
You're right.
Nothing's perfect. Because even that scale right there isn't 100% correct, because now if fish carving got into the total level of super world class bird carving, like the jet bernets and the tent duffs and everything, I would have to take that scale, wood burn it like that, and then I'd have to go with my fork and just kind of, just slightly, not a lot, but just slightly kind of round them. Because when you look at a fish, when you look at this fish, you look at it, it's flat. It doesn't do this, but there is a detail in that scale. And until you start getting in there and carving one, you don't really, you know, notice this stuff. And one of the keys, the key things in that phrase, you don't notice this stuff until you start doing it. On the bottom, right here, when you look at the throat latch area, okay, there's the gills that come open. You got the gill panels, they come open, but then you got the gill flaps. They're kind of an accordion. If you take a fish, hold it upside down, head facing away, the right side always, 100% of the time, will lay over this. On any kind of fish, you know, any freshwater fish, bass, northern, walleye, sunfish, crappie, every time. And when I did a seminar once at the Northern Nationals, I said that. The next year I did a seminar again, and a couple guys from Wisconsin came and said, "We tried to prove you wrong." I said, "What do you mean?" He said, "We tried to prove you wrong. We sat down at the end of the dock, and we must have caught 200 sunnies and crappies, and we looked at every single one of them. Not once did we find it. But I'm here to tell you, 2 years ago, I found a fish that went the other way. Only one. And I check them a lot." So nature will always screw you up with those rules. So, but you're safe to say that one goes over that every time. And it's those little things. I'm sure everyone has been carving, and but what happens here? And then you start going through your reference, and you're like, I don't see that. Oh, how does that? No, you're lost. And I still do it sometime here and there. I think, well, I forgot what that. You know, how does that go? Because you can't remember everything. And there's like on the fish, when you look at that, there's so many different things, little scales that go weird and so on. So that's kind of fish carving 101, kind of in a nutshell. If anyone has anything they've ever thought of or they were doing, even it doesn't even have to pertain to fish, just carving in general. I mean, like I said, I've been doing this for 30 years, and like I said, I've done everything from rocks, and still haven't carved a duck yet, though. But one of these days, someone will get me to do it. But I've pretty much done everything. If anyone has any general knowledge, questions that doesn't necessarily pertain to fish.
Is your butternut getting harder to get?
Butternut is getting harder to get. It's got a worm, and it's pushing farther south. So
kind of a blight that's.
Well, it's kind of like the emerald ash borer, but it's a worm, and it's going in and it's eating. I don't have a piece of it here, But I'll tell you what, it makes really cool bases because now you have this nice piece of butternut that's got all these holes, all these wormholes in it. And granted, yeah, it makes nice bases for carvings, but it makes lousy furniture because it's got all the holes in it. And it's just, you know, you can't make cabinets out of it or such. So, but hopefully with this frost, you know, with this extremely cold, they said that that's going to kill that emerald ash borer, bring it way down. Maybe it'll do something with that, you know, the butternut deal too. But a lot of our butternut is in Ohio and in that part of the town, and I don't know if they got this extreme cold like we did here. But yeah, it is getting hard. The other tree that's really hard to find, that's just like butternut, a little softer, and it's the only tree I know that I can go out, cut today, I can carve it, and it won't crack. And that's catalpa. That's that big tree with the beans. So anytime I kind of have mental pictures, I've got 2 of them in my neighborhood. When they get X big, they hollow out inside. And in Minneapolis, they're one of the first trees to blow over in a windstorm. So I kind of have them catalog where they are in the windstorm, then I go driving and hope. You know, I said, that's really bad to say it, but I hope to see it blowing over so I can help them chainsaw it apart. But it's a really neat wood. I don't have a piece of it with me because I think I've used all my stock. But if you know anybody who's got one and they're going to, you know, cut it down, it's an excellent carving wood.
So does it just have low moisture content that you worry about checking it?
Yeah, very, very, very stable. I don't know about the moisture content, but as far as that goes, it's very stable. I mean, I've literally cut it because someone, I think Marv told me that. I've literally cut it, carved, and waited for it to start checking and cracking, and it didn't. And when I cut the pieces, I always cut my wood in half, just because you don't. If you leave it whole, you'll tend to get cracking more. But you split it in half, and then the moisture can get out through the rings that way. All my catalpa, I've always been able to use the whole thing. I've never had to cut off that 3 inches or so. But it's softer than butter, so I think that's why you don't see furniture being made out of it or being used a whole lot, because it is really soft and it marbles real easy. But for carving, well, it's great, great. Walnut, I know if you carve it green, it's easier to carve. But when you do that, then you have to oil it every night and put it away. It's a whole nother process that I'm not old enough to learn or young enough to learn, and I'm not gonna. So I'll stick with the more stable dry wood. But a lot of woods too, especially walnut. The more it ages, the harder it gets. Tupelo, I just found that out too. The longer you keep Tupelo around, the harder it is to work with. The fresher it is, the better. And that's another stable wood too. When you cut it, it doesn't have to dry as long. Like most woods, it's an inch per year. However, if you're just letting it air dry, so say if it's 4 inches, they recommend that you let it sit for 4 years till it's stable. Kind of just a not an exact science, but just kind of one of those old-timey deals where before they had moisture meters and things. So yeah, that's